Welcome to Defcon 3. I'm KT McFarland. Washington is seized with the debate of should we attack ISIS? Should we bomb them? And should we bomb them in Syria? The bigger question, though, is if we do, how effective would it be? To talk about that is David Gartenstein-Ross. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and author of Bin Laden's Legacy, Why We're Still Losing the War on Terror. So, David, let me ask you the big question. If the United States were to bomb ISIS in Syria, would it be effective?
It would, but in combination with a broader strategy. Airstrikes alone are not a strategy, even though they've succeeded thus far in turning back some of ISIS's momentum as it tried to go into the Kurdish areas of Iraq. But I think that the strategy needs to concentrate on ISIS's weaknesses, and it has a lot of weaknesses. It's basically betrayed everybody who's decided to work with it, so it's surrounded by enemies right now. It also almost certainly is primed for possible internal fissures. It's asked its own members to commit unspeakable atrocities, even beyond what jihadist groups sign up for. And you can see that ISIS is afraid of fissures. It actually just beheaded one of its own intelligence chiefs, as well as a number of other officials, in part out of concern that they were feeding intelligence to Western powers. So accentuating those fissures, helping ISIS's enemies, including providing weapons, intelligence, money to non-state actors, similar to what the U.S. did earlier during the surge in Iraq, when it helped to prop up a non-state group called the Sahwa, or the Awakening, is part of what would be a more comprehensive strategy.
All right, but let's get practical. Whether it's possible to take the Sunni moderates, if there are any left in Iraq or Syria, and then also the Sunni moderate states in the region, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, would it be possible to craft a coalition with them to sort of hook up with the moderate Sunnis inside Syria and Iraq?
It certainly is, in my view. And let's not overstate the degree to which the moderates are powerful, particularly inside of Syria. They're a much more marginal force than U.S. political discourse sometimes suggests. But in Iraq, for example, you have tribes who worked with the United States previously and who are alarmed by what ISIS is doing, while at the same time they have problems with the Shia government. That makes maneuvering in this regard particularly difficult because, Iraq is a sovereign nation, and if you're going to aid non-state factions inside of Iraq, it has to be done so very delicately and with full negotiations with the Iraqi government. But I think this should be the kind of thing which is inside of our arsenal, because it's very clear that the Iraqi security forces alone are not doing the trick.
All right, if you look at some of the Sunni states in the region, I'm thinking particularly of Saudi Arabia, they've been really reluctant to join any kind of a coalition that would go after any kind of Sunnis, even Sunni jihadists. There's some evidence that the Saudis themselves, or at least some Saudi families, are providing some of the funding for ISIS. How likely would it be for them to say, we're now going to turn on our Sunni brethren as being too violent, and we're going to join some kind of coalition to destroy them?
Well, the relationship is a bit more complex in my view, and you know of all people that I'm no Saudi apologist, but it seems that Saudi Arabia's funding, best I can tell, dried up when ISIS ended up splitting from al-Qaeda, when it got booted out, in part because this suggested that ISIS was extraordinarily hard to control. I do believe that prior to that split, Saudi Arabia gave funding to ISIS, and I think it still gives funding through its pantheon of non-state charities that are actually quasi-state institutions. I think it still provides funding to the al-Qaeda affiliate there, which is the Nusra Front. But the main thing that we want from Saudi Arabia is not a commitment of Saudi Arabian ground forces, but rather for countries like Saudi Arabia to really stop the spigot of assets that go to groups like ISIS. That is, make sure that those charities don't come back and start funding ISIS again. And there's another problem with respect to Saudi Arabia, which is, I mentioned before, I don't think they're funding ISIS. I do think they're funding al-Qaeda. And we know prior to bin Laden's death that al-Qaeda wanted to rebrand itself. Bin Laden thought that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who had previously led al-Qaeda in Iraq, which later would become ISIS, that he thought that bin Laden thought Zarqawi had so damaged the al-Qaeda brand that he wanted to rebrand it as a more moderate, a more rational jihadist alternative. And ISIS's rise with all these beheadings, all these severed heads on social media, and committing genocide against multiple groups, it provides a great opportunity for al-Qaeda to rebrand itself. So one thing I think we should work with the Gulf states on is trying to make sure that that doesn't happen, because this is a huge window of opportunity, unfortunately, for al-Qaeda to change the way it's seen in that region.
we're coming up to September 11th. Anniversaries mean a lot in the Muslim world. Should we in the United States be concerned that with ISIS having so many fighters coming with European passports, maybe potentially American passports, could that September 11th be an anniversary that we see some kind of another attack in the United States?
When asked about the possibility of terrorist attacks, I always say that, number one, we should never be afraid, but we should be vigilant. Some anniversaries, it seems like the risk is low or a little bit exaggerated. And I actually said that before the 10th anniversary, when there was a lot of fear that there might be an attack. This time, there's a very clear competition between al-Qaeda and ISIS to carry out an attack against the West or the United States specifically, as both are competing for supremacy over the global jihadist movement. I think that there is an elevated risk, but it's much more likely than not that there won't be an attack, and certainly more likely than not that there won't be a successful attack. But that being said, being vigilant, that's very much warranted.
Okay, well, thank you very much, David Gartenstein-Ross, author of Bin Laden's Legacy and senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. That's it for Defcon 3.